Hello and welcome to Tech with NK. In this video, we're going to look at the exercise Vanity Plates from CS50's Introduction to Programming with Python, and we're going to try to solve this together. Looking at the exercise, what are we expected to do? We are called to create a Python file, we call it plates.py, and implement a program that prompts the user for a vanity plate, and this program is supposed to output valid if the user's input meets all the requirements or invalid if it does not. We've also been told to assume that any letters in the user's input will be uppercase and to structure our program per the below, that is what we see here. We're going to define a function called main and another function called isValid. And this function called isValid has a parameter called s, which is a string which is supposed to check if the user's input is valid or not. And we are free to implement additional functions for the function isValid, that is one function per requirement. And if you look at the requirements, we've been given 4 in total. The first, we are supposed to check that all vanity plates must start with at least 2 letters. The second, to check that a vanity plate contains a maximum of 6 characters and a minimum of 2 characters. This maximum of 6 could be letters or numbers. The third condition is we are supposed to check that numbers cannot be used in the middle of a plate. For example, a valid plate will be AAA222, but an invalid plate will be AAA22A. And the number cannot start with a 0. So here it started with 2, that's valid, but if it started with a 0, that will be invalid. And the last condition is no periods, spaces, or punctuation marks are allowed in the vanity plate. To solve this exercise, we are going to use the advice that has been given to us here to implement functions for each of these requirements. And I'm going to create 3 functions mainly. One to check the first step, another to check the second and fourth because I just think they're easy enough to merge them and check them together. And a third one or a third function to check this third condition here. And we've been given a number of hints to check the Python documentation for strings to see methods that could be helpful, and also to use slicing, that's string slicing, to be able to iterate over a section of a string. We're definitely going to need a number of methods to make this exercise easy, and we're going to see some of them while implementing the program. And looking at the demo, we see an example of what the code should look like, or when running, what the code should look like. So if we run the program plates.py, we are supposed to prompt the user to enter a plate. And if the user enters something like hello, hello is 6 characters long and it contains only characters, so our program should return valid. If the user enters something like hello world, return invalid. If the user enters goodbye, return invalid because goodbye is 7 characters long. That said, I'm going to go ahead and copy this or paste it in VS Code, and we're going to start implementing our program. In VS Code, we'll create a directory, we'll call it plates, using the makedir command, and a directory has been created for us. We're going to cd into that directory, and while in this directory, we'll create a file, we'll call it plates.py, using the command code. And our file has been created for us. I'll just start by closing this terminal to give us more space to work. I'll go ahead and paste what has been given to us in the exercise. We're going to start writing our own functions together. So like I said, we're going to write 3 functions to check all the 4 conditions for this program. The first condition is to check if the first 2 strings of the user's input are letters. And to do this, we're going to use a string method called isAlpha. Let me show you what this looks like. Create some space here, or create a function, or call it check start, and I'll pass an argument to it or call my argument plate. In this function, I'm going to write the following code to check if the first 2 characters from the user's input are letters. At this point, I'll use the method isAlpha to check if these 2 characters are actually letters. And if these 2 characters are letters, I'm going to return true, otherwise, or return false. So what is this function doing? First of all, this function gets a parameter which we've called plate. Then We're checking the first two characters in this argument. Let me show you with an example. Let's say the user enters something like AAA, capital AAA 222. This is an example. If the user enters something like this, then what is our code going to do? Our code is going to slice and get the first two characters, that's capital A and capital A here, and check if these two characters are letters from the alphabet. And if that is true, we'll return true, else we'll return false. So go ahead and wipe this, and we're going to continue our program. The next function we're going to create, I'm going to call it length check. This function still will take another parameter, or call it plate. In this function, we're going to check two conditions. The first, if the user's input is between 2 to 6 characters long, and the second is if the user's input is alphanumeric only. That is, if the user's input contains only numbers or letters, and no special characters like underscore or periods or anything like that. I'll just use an if statement, or say if 2 is less than or equals to the length of plate, and this length less than or equals to, or this length less than or equals to 6, and plate dot is all num. If this is true, we'll return true, otherwise we'll return false. So how does this code work? Let me show you again using another sample. Say the user enters something like AAA 222. What our code is going to do is going to calculate the length of this string, in this case 6, and check if the length of the string is found between 2 and 6. In this case it's true because the length is 6, and it's also going to check if the string has only alphanumeric characters, that is either letters or numbers, and it's also true in this case, and so we're going to return true. If the user entered something like AAA 222 or 22 and a period, this check is going to fail and we're going to return false. And for our last check, we need to verify that numbers are not found in the middle of the user's input or in the middle of a plate. We're going to define another function to help us check this. We're going to call our function check underscore numbers. It's also going to take a variable or a parameter, we'll call it plates. I'll start by writing the code, then I'll explain to you how the code functions. I'll use a for loop to iterate over the user's input. I'll say for index, comma, underscore, or explain why I'm doing this. In enumerate plate, I'll say if plate at any index, yes, is a digit, using is digit, or check if this digit, so plate index is equal to 0, or not plate index colon dot is digit. Return false in this case, break out of the loop, then return true. Okay, so what does this function do? Let me put a number of sample responses from the user. I'll say AAA 222. I'll also say AAA 22A, and lastly AAA 022, for example. Okay, let's say the user's input is something like AAA 222. We'll start by iterating over the user's input using the function enumerate, because we want to return the index and the character. That's the rule of this function enumerate. It's going to return every character here with its corresponding index in this syntax: index, character, index, character, index, character. Because our code, or because in this function we're not using the character, I used an underscore because it's not relevant to us, and I'm only taking the index. And with the index of each character, what I'm doing is, in this line of code, I'm checking if at any position there is a digit, using the method is digit. I'm doing plate index, so plate index is digit, to check if any of these characters is a digit. And it's clear that this line of code is going to fail at this point at the first A, the second A, the third A, but it's going to pass the test in this 2 here. That's the first 2 in the user's input. So let's say it passes the test at this point 2. At this point, we know that there is a number in the user's input because this line of code resulted to be true. So if there is a number in the user's input, we want to check 2 things. Firstly, we want to check if this first number that we found is equal to 0. If it's 0, we return false. Or if after this number that we found, say 2, from the point that we have this number that's at this index, plate index, till the end of the string. So I'm iterating from index, colon, till the end of the string. That's the meaning of this syntax here. So from this point till the end of the string, we're checking if all the characters there are numbers. So what are we doing? Plate index till the end. So from this point till the end is digit. And we're putting a not here to make sure that if it is not a digit, it's going to be true. So this line of code here is to check that from the point where we find our first number, at this point till the end, is there any other letter or is there any other input from the user that is not a number? If so, return false. That's, for example, this here. We realize that this user input is going to pass the test at this point too, and it's going to fail this test here because there's a character in the user's input that is not a number, rather it's a letter, which is A. So this test is going to fail and it's going to return false. And looking at this again, I just realized that this 0 is supposed to be a string, so I'll do this. So if the character at this specific index is equal to 0, or if there's any other character from this index to the end of the string that is not a number, will return false. And after doing this check, we're breaking out of our loop. The reason I'm using the break statement here is because I want to stop this loop after checking the first number or the first digit that I find in the user's input. Because if after checking this first digit everything is okay, I don't need to check any other digits. So from this point I can just break out of the loop. And if after checking the digits in the user's input, making sure that the digits are not in the middle, but if they start at any point they continue to the end, and if everything is okay, I return true. Otherwise, this function is going to return false at any point in the loop where a condition is not met. I really hope this line of code is clear enough. If not, feel free to leave your questions in the comment section below and I'll be pleased to explain better. I'll go ahead and wipe this. And at this point, we've successfully checked all the conditions that have been given to us. So I'll just go ahead and implement the function is valid. In this function, I'm simply going to call all these other functions that we've created. Check start, len check, and check numbers. I'll use an if statement to do this. I'll say if check start s and check numbers s and len check s. All of these are true. We'll return true, else we'll return false. I think this is good enough for the implementation of this program, and at this point I'll just go ahead to test it together with you. I'll open my terminal, clear this. I'll say python plates.py. We've been prompted to enter input, which is what we expected. So far our code is working fine. We're going to enter something like AAA222, and this is a valid plate. We'll try the program again. We'll enter something wrong this time around. We'll say AA022, invalid. Let's try something else. This time around, let's say BBCCFF, valid. And for our last check, let's do AAA22A, and we say this is invalid. I want to believe this proposal is a good enough implementation to solve this exercise. Feel free to try this on your own, modify the code as you want, make it shorter, make it longer, make it more understandable for you. Either way, I think that's fine so far as you understand what you're doing. Thank you for following up to the end of this video with me. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below and I'll be more than pleased to answer you. If you enjoyed this video, do support the channel by hitting the like and subscribe buttons so you won't miss on any upcoming content. That said, have a good day.